Hello, this is Kyle Adams, Principal Solutions Engineer with Alfresco. In this video, we'll demonstrate how we can create a social content management solution leveraging Activiti, Alfresco 1, and MuleSoft. Let's start off by talking about the source of our social content management. In my browser, you'll see that we've navigated to twitter.com and we're searching for hashtag activity. The search results for hashtag activity are bringing back tweets such as the announcement of the limited availability release of Activiti 1.4 that includes things like the DMN specification, more complex forms, and lots of other features. Once we've captured all of this content using our solution, our goal would be to store these tweets inside of Alfresco 1 and retain them for the specified period of time that's mandated by our organization. We can also interrogate the content of the tweets and look for specific terminology to maybe kick off additional workflow processes. For instance, if any of these tweets were to contain the word bug or issue, we can look for that and kick off a support process to help manage that as a support case. Let's quickly switch over to Alfresco 1, and I'm just going to log in as the administrative user. I've created a collaboration site called Social Content, and in the document library we have just one folder here at the top level called Twitter. This is where we're going to manage our Twitter content, and I've also created subfolders to manage content related to a specific hashtag that we want to search for. So in particular, we have one for activity. So anything that we pull into the system regarding the hashtag activity, we're going to drop into this folder and perform extra processing. So this is the target, which is Alfresco 1, and the source will be Twitter. So now let's talk about how we can actually get that content into Alfresco. To manage this whole process, we're actually going to leverage the Activiti BPM suite. Activiti is actually going to orchestrate MuleSoft flows, which will do a bulk of the work to pull content, transform it, and then load it to a target. So Activiti's job is actually to kick it off and manage any kind of flow between human actors and system actors alike. So if we jump into Kickstart, we have one particular process called Twitter archive process, and in the start form we actually have one field that will take our input, which will be the search term that we're going to use against Twitter. Then we're going to make a REST call to our MuleSoft flow. So we're going to provide an endpoint, which is just Mule running on localhost with port 8080, and a URL context of Twitter archive. The JSON payload that we're going to send over is actually just a property called hashtag that we'll use inside of the MuleSoft flow, and we're also going to map the response from MuleSoft and present the query, the counts, the completed time, and refresh URL in the subsequent human task. And in the subsequent step, the review Twitter archive results step, we're doing exactly that. So if we were to expand this and switch to the form tab, we see that we're actually leveraging a form that's predefined that will display all of these results. So what we've reviewed so far is that we have a source of Twitter, which is going to contain tweets regarding activity. We have a target, which is Alfresco 1, and we have Activiti BPM suite, which is going to orchestrate the MuleSoft flows. So let's drop into the last piece of the puzzle, which is MuleSoft. If we switch over to Anypoint Studio, we see that we already have a project with a few flows configured. Here we have a top-level flow that exposes an HTTP connection, and it has configuration to expose the Twitter dash archive path to be executed through a REST post request. Then we're going to take the contents of that JSON payload and use that in the Twitter step. So here we're simply using the search operator, and we're going to get the JSON colon hashtag value from that HTTP call. Here we have a for loop, and essentially we're going to use the response that came back from Twitter, and we're particularly going to use the tweet array in the JSON response. This is going to allow us to loop through each of the individual tweets, and we're going to call the subflow that we've configured here a little bit lower. In this flow, we simply have a logging statement for debugging purposes, and we're setting some values that we're going to use in the subsequent steps. So here we're actually taking the screen name from the payload, the text from the tweet, and the unique identifier of the tweet, and saving those to flow vars that can be used throughout the scope of this flow. Lastly, we have two different CMIS connectors configured in the flow. One is actually going to perform an operation to get and create a folder by path. So here you see that we just have a hard-coded path of that social content site in Alfresco 1 with subfolders inside of Twitter and Activity. And then we're going to automatically generate a brand new subfolder based on a Twitter handle. Last but not least, we actually have a create Twitter content step, which is actually going to create a document by path. So in this configuration, we actually are going to provide a name based on the tweet ID. We've again used the same exact folder path as we created in the previous step, and the content reference is actually going to be the Twitter text. Lastly, we're just setting the MIME type to text plain, and we're going to use the base CMIS colon document type, and the version will be major. So that's the gist of this configuration. Let's see this in action. If we switch back to Google Chrome and inside of Activity, we actually have a process application called Social Content Management. If we dive into here and start a brand new process, we can provide that activity hashtag, and let's kick off that process. And in a few seconds, that MuleSoft flow will finish running, and then we can refresh and look at the results. So just like that, we actually have a brand new step that's assigned to the same user that instantiated that process. So let's take a look at what has happened. We see that the time to complete this has happened in less than a second. So we're using the search term of hashtag activity. We're using a default search result count of 15. And I've also retrieved the Twitter refresh URL. Alright, so if everything worked correctly, we should be able to switch back to Alfresco 1, refresh the page, and everything has worked as expected. So we have subfolders that have been dynamically generated based on the Twitter handles. So here we see my Twitter handle of Kyle F. Adams, and we also see tweets that have been created based on what has been retrieved from the Mule flow. So the naming convention, if you remember, is using the tweet ID, which is unique. And if we click into this piece of content, we can actually see that this is simply just a retweet of the announcement that Activity 1.4 has been released for limited availability. So one last time to tie this all together, we have content that's coming from a source. For this particular instance, we're using Twitter. So we're taking tweets that contain hashtag activity as the source. We actually have Alfresco 1 as the target where we want to manage all this social content for long-term records management purposes or for some other capabilities such as kicking off additional flows for instances that tweets contain key terms. We're orchestrating the Mule flows using Activiti, and we're using MuleSoft to actually pull the content from multiple sources or one source. We're transforming the content as need be, and we're actually creating some content inside of Alfresco.